Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. It's a cold winter night. A large Italian-American family is asleep in their home after celebrating the holidays. Around 1 a.m., the mother wakes up to the smell of smoke. Within minutes, the house is engulfed in flames. George and Jenny Sodder manage to escape with 4 of their children. But upstairs, 5 more of their kids, ages 5 to 14, are trapped. The family screams for them. Neighbors rush to help. By morning, the house has burned to the ground. But when the ashes cool, there are no bodies, no bones, no teeth, no trace of the 5 children at all. They had simply vanished. This is not a story that ends with a tragic accident. This is a mystery that has haunted one family for nearly 80 years. You're listening to Archive Vault Podcast, where we open the sealed files and examine the disappearances they never solved. I'm your host, Joshua. Tonight, we investigate the Sodder Children. Welcome to the Vault. Everything you're about to hear is based on eyewitness accounts, official records, newspaper reports, and the Sodder family's own investigation. No speculation, just the case file. Now, let's go back to Christmas Eve, 1945, in a quiet town in the hills of West Virginia. George Sodder was born in Sardinia, Italy, in 1895. At age 13, he emigrated alone to the United States. Like many immigrants of his time, he worked hard, started a trucking company, and built a successful life. He and his wife Jenny raised 10 children in a big white house on a hill just outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. The family was well known and respected in the community. George was known for his strong opinions, especially his outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the Sodder home was filled with the usual holiday warmth. The younger children were excited, playing with new toys. The older ones were laughing and talking. The family had even debated whether to keep the Christmas lights on all night. They decided to leave them on. Around 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sodder woke up to a strange noise on the roof. She thought it might be a milk bottle, so she went back to sleep. Then around 1 a.m., she woke again, and this time to the smell of smoke. She rushed downstairs and discovered fire coming from the electrical fuse box. She screamed for her husband. George ran to wake the children. 4 of them, Don, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia, managed to get out of the house with their parents, but the other 5 were still upstairs. Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5. The parents shouted for them to come down. The children shouted back that they were coming, but they never appeared. George tried to climb the stairs, but the flames were already too intense. He ran outside to get the ladder that was always leaning against the house, but the ladder was missing. He tried to start his 2 trucks to use them to reach the windows. Neither truck would start, even though they had worked perfectly the day before. Neighbors arrived and tried to help, but the fire spread with terrifying speed. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, it was too late. The house burned to the ground in less than an hour. When the sun rose on Christmas morning, all that remained was a pile of hot ashes and 5 children who had seemingly disappeared without a trace. As the Sodder house burned on Christmas morning 1945, the nightmare was only beginning. George and Jenny Sodder stood helplessly watching their home turn to ashes, screaming the names of their 5 missing children. Neighbors formed a bucket brigade, but the fire was too fierce. The volunteer fire department didn't arrive until much later. Some accounts say hours later, because the town's only fire truck had mechanical problems that night. By dawn, the house was completely gone. A small crowd gathered to search through the smoldering ruins. They expected to find bones, teeth, or at least some remains of the 5 children, but they found almost nothing. The official fire chief later claimed the fire was so hot that it had completely cremated the 5 children. But this explanation quickly fell apart. The Sodders had a coal furnace in the basement. Earlier that night, George had banked the fire before going to bed. Yet the fire had started near the electrical fuse box on the first floor. Far from the furnace, even more disturbing details began to emerge. The family's phone lines had been cut. When Jenny tried to call the fire department, the phone was dead. The ladder that was always kept leaning against the side of the house was mysteriously missing. George's 2 trucks, which had worked fine the day before, would not start, as if someone had tampered with them. The family's Christmas lights stayed on for a long time during the fire, suggesting the electrical system hadn't failed immediately. No one upstairs had screamed for help after the initial shouts. The 5 children had simply gone silent. A few days after the fire, the family sifted through the ashes themselves. They found a few small bones and what appeared to be a human liver. But when sent for analysis, experts said the bones were too old to belong to the children, and the liver was most likely a piece of beef liver from the family's dinner the night before. Crucially, no teeth were ever found. Children's teeth are extremely resistant to fire. Even in intense house fires, teeth usually survive. But here, nothing. The more the Sodders looked into the fire, the less sense it made. George Sodder, who had been very vocal against Mussolini and the Italian fascist regime, began to suspect this was no accident. He believed someone had taken his children as revenge for his political views. The family refused to accept that their 5 children had simply burned up without a trace, and that refusal would turn into a lifelong obsession. In the days and weeks after the fire, the official investigation was surprisingly brief. The coroner's office quickly ruled that the 5 Sodder children had died in the fire. The cause was listed as faulty wiring or Christmas tree lights. Case closed. No autopsies. No deeper investigation. But George and Jenny Sodder refused to accept this. George began his own relentless investigation. He hired private detectives and offered large cash rewards for information. The family placed a large billboard along US Route 19 near their new home, with photos of the 5 missing children and the bold question, "Where are they?" For decades, that billboard became a landmark in Fayetteville. Motorists would see it for over 30 years. Strange clues and sightings started coming in. A witness reported seeing a man watching the Sodder house on Christmas Eve, just hours before the fire. Another witness claimed to have seen a car with 5 children matching the Sodders' description, speeding away from the area that night. In 1947, a woman in a Charleston hotel said she saw the children with 2 Italian-speaking men. When she tried to speak to the oldest girl, one of the men became angry and pulled the child away. Years later, in 1968, Jenny Sodder received a photograph in the mail. On the back was written, "Louis Sodder." The photo showed a young man who looked strikingly like Louis would have looked as an adult. The family hired investigators, but the lead went cold. Even more suspicious, George discovered that the local fire chief had allegedly removed a block of liver from the scene and buried it without telling the family. When they confronted him years later, he admitted he had no idea whose remains they were. The Sodders also learned that their fuse box had been in perfect condition just days before the fire, and multiple people reported hearing a loud explosion-like sound on the roof that night, the same sound Jenny had heard before the fire started. George became convinced that someone had kidnapped his children and set the fire as a cover-up. He suspected it was connected to his strong anti-Mussolini stance. He had once publicly cut down an Italian flag and made enemies in the Italian-American community. Some theories even pointed to the mafia or remnants of pro-fascist groups seeking revenge. For the rest of their lives, George and Jenny Sodder never stopped searching. George died in 1969, still convinced his children had been taken. Jenny lived until 1989, keeping the billboard up and the hope alive until the very end. The case has generated countless theories over the decades. The official story: the children died in the fire, and their bodies were completely incinerated. The kidnapping theory: someone, possibly tied to George's anti-Mussolini politics or local grudges, set the fire as a distraction and kidnapped the children. Mafia/revenge theory: George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini may have attracted attention from pro-fascist groups or organized crime. The "they survived" theory: the children were taken and raised elsewhere. The 1968 photograph of the man resembling Lewis still fuels speculation today. Modern investigators have pointed out major problems with the official explanation. A fire hot enough to completely destroy 5 bodies without leaving bones or teeth should have also destroyed the house's foundations and appliances. Yet many items in the basement survived relatively intact. In 2021 and 2022, some of the Sodder grandchildren submitted DNA samples in hopes of matching them with unidentified remains across the country. So far, no matches have been found. The case remains officially unsolved. The disappearance of the 5 Sodder children on Christmas Eve 1945 is one of America's most heartbreaking unsolved mysteries. 5 young lives vanished in a single night, leaving behind a family that would spend the rest of their days tormented by questions. No bodies, no clear answers. Only ashes, strange clues, and a mother and father who refused to give up hope. The billboard finally came down after Jenny's death, but the mystery never did. To this day, the Sodder Children case raises disturbing possibilities. Was it a tragic accident the authorities rushed to close? Or was it a carefully planned crime hidden behind a fire? Whatever the truth is, the image of 5 children missing from their beds on Christmas morning continues to haunt anyone who hears the story. It reminds us that some fires don't just destroy homes, they erase lives and leave questions that burn for generations. Thanks for listening to this episode of Archive Vault Podcast. The Sodder case file is still open. If you have any information, the family's descendants continue to seek answers. If you enjoy unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and stories that refuse to die, subscribe and join us next time as we open another file from the vault. I'm your host, Joshua. Until then, keep searching. Some answers are still out there. Thank you for listening to Archive Vault Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and found it insightful. Wishing you a great week ahead, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll be back soon with more stories from the archives. See you next time.